Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. To be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host, delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Hey, Noah, are you enjoying this unseasonably warm weather?
You know what? I got back from Amsterdam visiting the Dutch, and what I've learned is that any of these coastal places that have this very temperate climate, even if they don't measure it in freedom units, is vastly superior to this 90, 100 degree to negative 70 degree. I mean, the temperature delta in the area of the country that you and I live in is a testament to human survival.
You know, I don't mind it, though. I'll take it.
Yeah, it keeps the riffraff out, 100%. Do you want... sorry, that was the quiet part out loud. I'm sorry. Do you want to do some feedback before I get myself into any more trouble?
Let's do it.
That'd probably be good. Our first email comes in from Craig. Craig writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I've written in a few times and have appreciated your insight and feedback. I've tried and failed at setting up various flavors of servers like TrueNAS, Casa, etc. I have trouble getting them to do what I want them to do. I'm wondering if you have ever heard of HexOS. They're supposedly going to release their product sometime in the third quarter. It's a partnership with TrueNAS. If you hear anything, good or bad, would definitely appreciate your feedback. Maybe this is what I'm looking at in setting up a home lab that I can access remotely." And he links to hexos.com. So here's kind of where I want to start. I want to take your question. I'm going to take it a completely different direction, and I promise if you hang with me, we'll eventually come back and I will answer it very directly. But I want to kind of start here. What I hear Craig asking underneath his real question is Craig wants to learn about storage servers, and Craig would like to leverage his knowledge that he wishes to acquire about storage servers to then set up a storage server in his house. He's tried and not been successful at setting up a storage server in the past, and so now he's looking at other solutions. So Steve, if somebody came to you, if I came over to your house and I knocked on your door and I said, "Mr. Evans, I'd like to learn about storage servers," how would you walk me through really truly understanding what goes into a storage server?
I personally like the idea of doing it, I'm going to say by hand, but I don't mean go and compile the software. That's just a little too much. However, if you want to learn how the storage works and to that end, not just how it works on a surface level, because you can get some of that from a web UI that gives you a nice kind of smooth on-ramp, but really understanding some of the bits that go into it, such as how are the hard drive heads aligned, and what do blocks mean, and how does the block alignment impact my performance, and all that sort of stuff. I would say start working from the command line. A lot of this it seems intimidating at the start, but it's really not that bad. There is a learning curve, yes, but it's not like you become an elite hacker and have 700 lines of code just to get your storage server up. Like maybe you end up with a dozen lines of various things that set up your pool and, give you a format and turn on things like scrubbing and all of that sort of stuff. But as a general rule, I would start by essentially tweaking the command line, because it seems to me that the use of the UI is enhanced by understanding what the UI is doing for you under the hood. And so even if you went through the trouble of just setting it up and then you're like, you know what, that was a little bit too much of a deal for me, and you fall back to a UI just for ease of use, I think that you're going to be much further ahead.
I want to be clear here. At some point you do get used to it, to the CLI, and at some point you won't even see the code anymore. It'll just be man, woman, girl in the red dress. It won't matter. That was funny. Okay. All right. So, all right. My attempted humor effect. So where is the appropriate place for whiz-bang type things. So if I am a person and I'm looking at TrueNAS and there's just an ISO, Steve, and I can download the ISO and I can put it onto a flash drive and I plug it in and it turns what previously was just a PC into a storage server, where is that appropriate?
I think it's appropriate a lot of places, right? Especially if you don't want to learn. It's appropriate when you have this idea that, hey, I've got a couple of disks. I know that I probably have data that I don't necessarily want to store in the cloud, or I have too much data to store in the cloud. I want to do something that's going to generally do the right thing first off, as opposed to something that may have enterprisey feeling to it that doesn't necessarily help you out. So I'll give you an example. We talk a lot about TrueNAS or related products, Unraid, and things like that. TrueNAS, for example, will set up ZFS for you. And an example of doing the right thing is that it picks a generic block size that is considered a sane default for you, right? Without having to ask you, which one of the 50 options for block sizes do you want? And you having to go in and figure that out. It's much better to use something like TrueNAS and get the benefits of ZFS out of the box, such as the bit rot protection and things like that, and just go about your day without learning how the storage works. I would absolutely give my dad, for example, a TrueNAS box. And in fact, we did that for, we worked with IX Systems for the small business that he was at for a long time. Right. And they just dropped it in place and it did its thing. And it did them well. Right. And nobody there had any idea of what was doing under the hood. That's who benefits from going with a UI.
So our first recommendation is going to be give it a shot to try to learn it from the ground up. And so if it were me, I might start with either, like a Red Hat license, or a Red Hat's a distro, or an Ubuntu distro. And then I would start by setting up ZFS. So I would install the ZFS utils package, and I would start by setting up a pool. And this is how we talked last week about a contingency plan where if the technical lead in the house passes away, how does the rest of the family carry on? And this is how we did this in our house with my wife, is I walked her through, I gave her 2 hard drives, and I said, here's kind of a ZFS cheat sheet. I want you to go through and kind of play with it a little bit and see what you think and what you're able to do, what you like, what you don't like. And so she did, and she got comfortable importing a ZFS pool and mounting it and being able to get into it and then get the data off of it. And so I would start there. Once you get that down, then the second thing I would do is I would go about the process of setting up a Samba share, and I would teach myself how to do that. These things should not take you terribly long. I would say the ZFS pool is maybe a 10, 15 minute, maybe 20 minutes tops from start to finish, presuming you don't have any data. And the Samba thing is even less. It's like maybe a 5-minute thing. It's largely just putting some input into a config file. And that will get you up and running with a basic file server. Now, one of the things that Craig writes in his email is that it wasn't able to do what he wants to do. It would help us tremendously if you can help us understand what you're trying to get done with TrueNAS, because what we hear you saying is, I am having trouble with TrueNAS, so I want to add this other layer of complexity on top of it in the hopes that will solve my TrueNAS complexity problem. And I would respectfully submit to you that that's probably going to make the problem worse, not better. So what is it that we're trying to get TrueNAS to do that we can't get it to do? And once we are able to figure that out, then we can help you understand how to do that in TrueNAS. And then if appropriate, do it from HexOS. So what is HexOS? Because this isn't something that I previously had come across my radar. It's effectively software as a service for managing TrueNAS, and specifically TrueNAS scale. And so you have what they call the Hex Command Deck. And the Hex Command Deck is independent of your storage server. So your TrueNAS box still lives in your home. You still have all the clients and they connect to the TrueNAS box. But instead of managing it directly on the TrueNAS box is connected up to this Hex deck, which presumably runs inside of some sort of VM on a cloud, on DigitalOcean, on Linode, something like that. And they have a setup wizard. And that allows you to create the storage pools, create the folders, create the users, apply the permissions. And then based on the use case of the folder, different settings get applied there. It then starts monitoring the system, so they'll notify you if anything happens. And because because HexOS is running in the cloud, you can access it anywhere. You can manage it from anywhere. It's designed to be managed from your phone or your computer over a network connection. Because it's on a separate system, it has monitoring and notifications. By default, it comes with email and SMS notifications built in. And then they add value things on like live platform updates and new features that are just going to appear over time with the OS updates. They have little integrations for things like automation and workflows and orchestration, and they simplify the way that you do storage and apps and VMs and server-to-server syncs, sending those snapshots if you want to move them from one place to another. So it's a very cool project. We'll be excited to kind of watch it as it gets off the ground, but I would start from kind of ground zero, then I'd work your way up. Coming full circle, we promised you we'd give you an answer. So if you're asking, how do I go about actually doing this? How do I go about setting this up? What are my next steps? Steve, I have always kind of started with Ubuntu from the standpoint that it had the ZFS utils baked in. I just had to install them, but there's support for it in the kernel. Previously, I had been using DKMS to get it worked on Red Hat, but there's a better way. Can you talk about that?
Sure. We'll just go into just a tiny bit here. So for people who don't know, DKMS is a post-install hook. So there is a process by which your drivers are being built. When your package manager updates the kernel, it calls DKMS and says, hey, I have been updated. I've updated myself. I have new headers and I have a new kernel version. Go build whatever you have been configured to build for the kernel. And in this case, we're talking about ZFS. The challenge with this is that sometimes the DKMS doesn't build properly. Most of the time, it's fine. But every once in a while, it messes up, and that error or that problem gets buried, and you reboot, and then you don't have, for example, video card drivers, or you can't find your pool because the module doesn't build and therefore doesn't get loaded when you reboot the computer. So that is DKMS. The alternative to this is there's ABI, which is a binary interface for the kernel. And what they do is these packages track the ABI of specific kernel family versions, and they build against that as opposed to the specific kernel headers, which means for you, when you install this, it comes down as a pre-built package already knowing how to talk to that binary interface. And unless that interface breaks, those pre-built packages will continue to work for you until the ABI changes. So that basically means when you install an ABI package that is tracking the kernel, you don't have to compile anything. It comes kind of pre-baked as a driver and should work every time. And so that's the difference between DKMS and ABI.
How many times setting ZFS up on Red Hat or Red Hat derivatives, how many times have you had a problem with an update? How many times have you had the storage pool fall offline? How many times have you struggled with issues?
Since moving over to the ABI?
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to see a problem with this. I did see a few failures now and then in DKMS, and I've been running ZFS with DKMS on Linux since it was feasible to do so. So a very, very long time, right? CentOS 5-ish era. So I didn't have a ton of DKMS failures, to be fair, but they were enough that if I was doing remote stuff because I travel for work and I rebooted the box, when it didn't come up, it was a big enough pain that I decided that I was going to cut over to the ABI packages, and I have not had a problem since.
So I will tell you, Craig, if you are asking why to consider, if you get your hands wrapped around ZFS, either with a Red Hat derivative or with an Ubuntu derivative, and you get comfortable there and you're looking at the next layer and you look at TrueNAS and you go, yeah, I really want the little UI stuff. There are some value adds there from the standpoint that it makes it easier to do some of the things. So for example, one of the things is that it's going to manage the Samba shares. So you'll be able to create the shares in a web UI, that sort of thing. The second thing is, and probably some of the more important things, is the ability for snapshotting. So snapshotting can look like this. You go and you tell it, I want you to take a snapshot of my data set. And it asks you, how often do you want me to do that? I want you to do it every 15 minutes. How often do you want me to keep those snapshots after I take them every 15 minutes? I want every snapshot to be at least 30 days. I want to be able to roll back to it. Okay. And then it's just, that's it. You're done. And now every 15 minutes, it's going to take a snapshot. And if you ever need to roll back to that, and this is what we do for literally every UltiSpeed client, is, hey, we had a bad day. We got hit with ransomware. We got, no problem, boss. We log in, we open up the web UI, we click on the snapshot, restore to snapshot, and you're back to that point in time. It's so easy. You can even teach the clients to do it if they're comfortable doing so. The other thing is, once you have snapshots, it is a more efficient way to send data over the network for purposes of doing things like backups. Also, oh, by the way, they can be encrypted. And so ZFS send and receive will allow you to separate the key from the actual snapshot, meaning that you can store the snapshot of your server on somebody else's ZFS pool without giving them the key or access then to the data. And it's much faster because it's more efficient than you going through something like rsync. And so you're going to save yourself a ton of time. So all of those things. Oh, and one-click resilvering. So if there was only one reason to use TrueNAS over doing it by hand, one-click resilvering might be it. And one-click resilvering works the following. So we actually did this for a client this week. So you have, let's say, 8 drives. And or let's say 6 drives, actually, 2 VDEVs of 3. So you have 6 drives in the server, and they're all, let's say, 4 terabytes. And you're starting to run out of space, and you think to yourself, I want to go to 8 terabytes. Without even having to take the server offline, you can turn one of the drives off, disconnect it from the pool, pull it out, put an 8 terabyte drive in, and click resilver, and walk away. You go back to your business. As long as you've configured your storage pool correctly, that is to say you've got enough redundancy in the drive array that you can live without one of the drives. Obviously, it's not going to work if you stripe 2 drives together. But as long as you have a compatible drive layout, you'll be able to just put it in, let it run. That one gets done. You pull drive 2 out, you run it. You put drive 3 in, you run it. And by the time you're done, you've upgraded all of the drives from 4 terabytes to 8 terabytes, and they become instantly available. That storage is available for your client or for yourself. Our third email comes in from Andy. Andy writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. Thanks for responding to my Home Assistant question about power monitoring a few years ago. I have an HDMI question. I'm trying to set up a number of HDMI output devices to display on our projector in our family room. Each of the devices works okay when connected directly through a long lead to the projector, but I don't want to have to keep changing devices. I've purchased an HDMI switch. It's an unbranded 4 input, 20 output silver box, or 2 output silver box. A number of devices work as expected, including a PlayStation 5, a Nintendo Wii with an HDMI adapter, and an external laptop to an external display as required. However, here's the but. My son particularly enjoys some games on the PS2. I have an eBay adapter for the PS2 to get an HDMI out, and it works okay when bypassing the HDMI switch and connecting it directly to the projector when not using the switch. I also enjoy old games on the old PS2 console, and I love playing with my son. So I don't want to throw it away. It's so close to doing what I want it to do. Any thoughts or suggestions on how to get the PS2 working through the switch? Thanks for your enthusiasm to support the tech community, Andy." So Steve, I want to start with you. You have a way of switching sources in your home theater. Can you talk about how you're achieving having one display device and switching through a wide variety of different video sources?
We use a receiver, so I suppose it might be a little bit of cheating in that regard.
Is it? I mean, this is kind of what a receiver does, right? So it's the advantage in your approach is, one, you probably have 4 or 5 different HDMI inputs that are available to you.
Yeah, let's see. We've got the computer, an Apple TV, the Wii, and then a miscellaneous. So yeah, we've got at least 4 at any given time.
And the receiver is going to be cognizant of the fact that it's going to be taking a wide variety of different inputs, and then it's going to send them out over one output. So if a receiver is an option for you, if you've got some space, that might be some way to go. When I say a receiver, I'm talking about like a traditional home theater receiver. And so Sony or Pioneer or Panasonic, any of these companies are going to make Denon, I don't know how to pronounce it, are all going to make units that you could purchase and you'd be able to switch through. If you say to me, yeah, I don't have the space, the TV's mounted on the wall, that sort of thing, there is a device that will bail you out of the situation. And it is called the Decimator. And I've talked about it many times on the program. It's one of my absolute favorite Swiss tools for video. It is an absolute must anytime you're doing professional video. And essentially what it does is it is a 4-channel scaler. So it takes a input and offers, and so you have the ability for 3G, HD, SDI, or HDMI. You can pull it in, and then you can tell it programmatically on the little built-in screen with its built-in LCD controls, hey, I always want you to output a 1080p 30 frame per second. You can specify the frame rate, you can specify the refresh rate, you can specify the resolution, and then it standardizes no matter what you plug into the input side. It will figure out how to take it in, and then it will scale it to output it to exactly what you tell it to every single time. So your HDMI switch on the other end of it always gets presented with a consistent video signal. I guarantee you, dollars to donuts, if you go into any professional venue where they have a conference or they're doing presentation or they're doing, like theater and or, a conference venue, if you go up to the presentation booth, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see one of those little dinos, or not that, demons, SDI, HDMI converters that are available because it's going to standardize the process by which you can do videos. The downside, they are a little expensive. The Decimator sells for $295. So it's kind of an expensive thing, particularly if you had a bunch of different inputs, but it sounds from your email like it's not all of the inputs that aren't working. It's just one. In that case, I think the Decimator is going to be your best friend.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of October 27th, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. The SQLite developers have released version 3.47. pzip 10 is out. Jellyfin 10.10 is now available. EasyOS version 6.4 has been released. The GNOME team has announced the release of GNOME 47.1. Tor browser 14.0 has been released. The Alma Linux team has announced a new dev branch version named Alma Linux Kitten 10. Gen 2 Linux touts dtrace 2.0 support. NASA has announced that it has awarded $15.6 million in grant funding to 15 projects supporting the maintenance of open source tools, frameworks, and libraries used by the NASA science community. In open source hardware news, Chris Borg recently released updated plans for an open source 3D printable lathe. System 76 has unveiled the Thelio Astra ARM64 ampere-powered desktop computer. In open source security news, NVIDIA has published an advisory bulletin that details a total of 8 high-severity common vulnerabilities and exposures that impact both Linux and Windows platforms. OpenSSL 3.4 has been released with initial attribute certificate support. The team behind the IPS Snort has announced the release of version 3.5. And the ethical hacking distro Parrot OS has released version 6.2. In open source AI news, IBM doubles down on open source AI with new Granite 3.0 models. Hugging Face aims to cut AI costs with an open source offering named Hugs, which helps building chatbots and other AI systems. Google's SynthID text watermarking technology, a tool the company created to make AI-generated text easier to identify, is now available open source through the Google Responsible Generative AI Toolkit. AI video startup Genmo launches Mochi One, an open source rival to Runway, Kling, and others. And lastly, Ubuntu has turned 20 years old.
I'm here with Robie Basak. He is with the Ubuntu Technical Board. Welcome in, Robie.
Hello.
Can you take me back to when you got started with technology? What drew you into Linux to begin with?
So I grew up with DOS and Windows. Someone introduced me to Linux, and I just found it to be a platform that I could really play with and adapt, and I could get deeper into the internals much more easily.
So it was the ability to dig in and start playing under the hood.
Right.
You got a job with Canonical. Was it back in 2011? What did you get hired for? What excited you about Canonical? Why did you want to go work there and make this your day job?
After my introduction to Linux, I got into free software, and I really liked the idea that people can have control over their own computing, and I'd like to make a difference to things. So I wanted to make that difference. I got into Ubuntu as an Ubuntu user, and then from there it just became the natural thing that if I wanted a career in something, it could be a career in something that I was excited about. And so I was using Ubuntu, I was doing some Ubuntu development type stuff, but not shared very well publicly. And this was an opportunity to make a difference and share what I was doing and make it into a career to be doing the stuff that I enjoyed.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what the Ubuntu Technical Board is? And what purpose it serves.
So Ubuntu's got a way of making decisions, which is more to do with the fact that we need to make decisions in order to make progress. We will look at what needs doing and just say, this is what needs doing, let's just do it, let's get it done, let's ship it to our users because we're trying to improve that user experience. And that means that Ubuntu structurally needs an effective way of making those decisions. We need a way to be able to refer to essentially an executive team and say, this is what we want to do, let's do it, rather than being stuck in an indecisive way forever. So we delegate, and the structure is that we have teams in Ubuntu who are dedicated to particular areas. So there's a Ubuntu desktop team, an Ubuntu server team, Ubuntu release team, and those teams are empowered to make those decisions. In the rare occasions where something is a wider concern, where we need to think about Ubuntu as a whole, then those decisions can be made by the Ubuntu Technical Board. But that's fairly rare. Most of the time, we aren't invoked. Most of the time, there isn't anything contentious, and we simply rely on those experts in those other teams to make those decisions.
This is something I don't think people think a lot about. Can you talk to me about what the difference between Canonical and Ubuntu is?
So Ubuntu is a community project. At the top of that project is Mark, who set it up, and he calls himself the self-appointed benevolent detective for life. So he's in charge ultimately, but he doesn't really invoke that very often. We most of the time figure it out ourselves. But that means that anyone can join Ubuntu, anyone can hold any position in Ubuntu, including decision-making teams, that sort of thing. I think that's not very well understood. And Canonical are essentially the corporate sponsor of Ubuntu, so they fund a lot of Ubuntu developers. From the Ubuntu perspective, that's the structure of things.
It is true that a lot of people that are in those technical positions are employees of Canonical. Does that mean that Canonical makes all those decisions, or how is that delegated out?
Canonical make decisions about what they care about and what they want to advance inside Ubuntu, but then they work with the Ubuntu community and governance structure to make it happen. It's a fairly fine dance between the two sides of things. The way the Ubuntu community works is that they understand that for Ubuntu to be successful, we need a business model that can help fund the Ubuntu developers that are coming from Canonical. So on the whole, everyone gets on pretty well, and Canonical will say, we want to focus on doing whatever. This is the thing that we think is important, that our customers are telling us important, and this is how we want to do it in Ubuntu. And Ubuntu developers will figure out a way to make that happen.
Last night, I sat in, kind of as a guest, to an Ubuntu developer meeting. And in that, you were going through the process of getting a new person permission to push code. I guess my first question is that an accurate summation? But also, could you talk a little bit about why that process exists and what it's intended to do?
So the analogy would be in most software development projects, especially ones that are sort of free software, there's usually some level of requirement to get what you would call commit rights. Who gets to make the decision about what code changes are okay to put into the project? In Ubuntu, anyone can achieve that status as long as they can demonstrate that they're suitably competent and understand how to work with others and that sort of thing. And so the applicant yesterday is somebody who has been active in the Ubuntu community for a while as a fairly prolific developer, making lots of excellent contributions. So what he was saying was, can I please do that directly now with less supervision? That's what we were doing, and he demonstrated all of the sort of those properties. He understands the specifics about how Ubuntu development works, how to work with other Ubuntu developers in achieving things, how we make decisions, and the technical sides of the detailed infrastructure level things about how to make things work in such a way that we can be confident that the code changes he's going to make are going to be correct and that other Ubuntu developers are going to be unhappy, he's not going to break users, that sort of thing.
One of the things I noticed is a lot of the other members, they kept their comments very brief. They said, hey, I approve. They kind of moved on. You had an interesting approach. Your approach was to highlight where you thought some of the weaknesses were and then to explain why you didn't think in this particular case that was going to be a showstopper, so to speak. Can you talk about the process that you went through in your mind's eye? What are you looking for to give those kinds of permissions to people?
So the biggest thing that drives us in giving people permission to things is that we understand that they know what they don't know, so they can ask the right questions. The problem would come if they genuinely believe about a right course of action such that they think that everybody would agree with them, but they're wrong. That would be a problem for everybody because they would end up doing something which then causes ripple effects across other developers, other users to try and deal with that situation. So they need to know what they don't know. And that's difficult to assess, and that's the thing that we're trying to achieve by asking them those technical questions. The other thing that I care about is that we treat everyone fairly. And because there's a difference between, like, anybody can participate in Ubuntu, but there's a lot of canonical employees who do, I think it's important to make sure that everyone feels that they're being treated fairly, whether they're a canonical employee or not, and they're being held to the same line. And so that's why I tried to do some of those explanations, because there were actually some things that were going on there that might appear to be not reaching the bar that we normally require, but the specific circumstances meant that I thought that they did. So I wanted to explain those so that other people who might be turned down by being told you're not ready yet, you need to learn these other things, don't feel hard done by because somebody is somehow getting special treatment.
Can you talk about conflict resolution? Somebody has a problem. They say, I think it should be this package. I think this package should be upgraded. I think we should do it this way. I think we should do it that way. What do you want to see as what you would describe as the correct way to go about resolving that conflict? Is it going right to the technical board and saying, hey, make a decision? You've told me previously that you don't want to be the arbitrator. You try not to get involved. What do you like to see?
So the primary way that we make decisions in Ubuntu is by consensus amongst the Ubuntu developers. So the first thing that they need to do is start talking to the other Ubuntu developers, the other relevant ones, and try and understand their differences and come to a conclusion so that you eventually, if you have a useful conversation, a productive conversation, where everybody understands the other things the concerns that the others care about, then you can usually try and accommodate all of them and find some way forwards. And then everybody's happy and the thing lands, and you didn't have to invoke anything, any rules, any governance or anything like that. And we try to do that as much as we can in Ubuntu. We do lend a certain amount of weight to the people who are closer to it or who are more expert in that area. So, for example, if it's a desktop team decision about how something in the desktop should work, the desktop team in Ubuntu should definitely be consulted. So that would be the first question is, like, have you asked the desktop team what they think about this? Have you had that conversation with them? And hopefully that will all get resolved and the desktop team will accommodate what they're trying to achieve. And then it will go in non-controversially as landed, yep, we've managed to achieve that improvement. Because ultimately everyone is trying to make it better for users. It's just a question of figuring out how.
Talk to me about Cloud Init. What is Cloud Init and how is it intended to be used?
So after virtual machines were first invented, the way you would use a virtual machine was that it's pretending to be a real machine. So you would run the installer in that virtual machine, and so that's how you would end up with a running operating system there. And of course, you've got to guarantee that will work, because if the virtual machine is really pretending to be a real machine and the installer is designed for a real machine, it should always work on the virtual machine. The trouble is it's quite tedious, because you'd have to do this once manually for every virtual machine. So then you get people automating this. Let's automatically run the installer in a virtual machine. That still takes a lot of time. So when cloud computing was first invented, they needed a faster way to do this. And so the thought was, well, we will run the installer once and prepare an image, a disk image, with Ubuntu ready to go. And then we can clone that image so that when you start a cloud instance, which is essentially just a virtual machine that's on somebody else's computer, it will be able to start from that point in time. The only problem with this is that it will have the identity of the thing it was cloned from. And so if you start 10 cloud instances, well, they're all going to have the same identity. They're going to have the serious problems with this. Things like the SSH host key will be the same across all 10. And if you publish the image, now everyone's got the SSH private host key. So there needs to be a way for a cloud instance, once it's booted, to understand its own identity and adapt to its new identity and have none of its old identity left over that could cause problems. And that's the job that Cloud Init does. So we ship Cloud Image. When it first boots, Cloud Init runs and goes, okay, well, who am I? Who would I need to be? It will ask the cloud for its identity. The cloud will have some kind of instance identifier which will be given to Cloud Init. And it will also say, well, who am I for? Because I need to give them access and nobody else access. Similarly, it will go to the cloud infrastructure that's running there and fetch that identity, which is like the SSH key that should be authorized to access it. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that it will also need to do to adapt to that particular situation. Like, for example, how big a disk do I have? Let's expand the file system to the size of that disk. And there's probably a list of about 20 or 30 of these things that Cloud Init does. That's the place where we're putting all the knowledge about how to adapt from a cloned image into an identity of itself.
Where does the unique ID that the machine generates, where does that come from, or how is that generated?
So in a cloud environment, the identity is provided by the cloud, which has got some kind of instance ID. But there are actually a couple of other places where an identity matters. Like the SSH host key is essentially an identity in itself, and Cloud Init will regenerate that SSH host key randomly. And then there are some other things like machine ID, which systemd will generate randomly in a way that we trust is going to be globally unique.
Robie Basak, I appreciate the time, sir. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Great, thank you very much.
I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to hang out with Robie, get to see him in person at the Ubuntu Summit, which just concluded. I just got back. I got to tell you, my initial takeaway from Ubuntu Summit is it is a very, very elaborate conference insofar as they didn't spare anything. It was at the World Forum, which is just a fantastic building. And so far as I understand it, some very important things happen in that building. It is right next door to Europol, which so far as I understand that is one step under Interpol. And just walking up to it as kind of a security nut who, does installation of security cameras and access control, being able to see the layers and layers and layers of security where you've got posts that come out of the ground and you've got glass and then you've got the fence and then you've got access control and you've got cameras, and it was unreal. I learn a lot more about people by being able to observe them interacting with other individuals than I learn in some of the interviews sometime. And that was certainly my case with Robie. And the thing that I really appreciated about him, and I think that the real value he brings to the community, is in his day job, he works on the Ubuntu servers team for Canonical. On the community side, he's on the Ubuntu technical board, or technical council, as you just heard in the interview. And what that means is Robie can interact in two ways. One, in a very high level in which he will talk directly to other technical people and will engage with them at their level and talk them through things, all the way down to entry level stuff. And so when I watch people come up to the booth and they did something interesting, they ran a booth in which they basically put a sign up and said, come to us and tell us what's not working with Ubuntu and we will fix it. And so they, is there a package that doesn't work for you? Is there something that's out of date? And so as people would come up and say, it doesn't work, I don't know why it doesn't work, I would watch him go from what I understood him to be able to do to talk at a very high level and really dig into the nitty gritty details and drop all the way back down to, okay, we don't want to upgrade the package because we want to make the smallest possible change, else we might break it for somebody else. So really the first step here is we need to fill out a bug report. And then from there, all we're looking to do is describe the problem. We're not necessarily suggesting a solution. Then the package maintainer, the people that work on it, they will figure out what is the minimum change necessary to fix the problem. And then we will backport that, thereby not breaking the package for anybody else that's using the older one, and at the same time, fixing your problem. And walking them through and making sure that they understand that, I thought that level of patience and investment into people, particularly, I am impressed by it when the people don't necessarily have anything to offer back and it's just a one-way street where you're just seeking to help. And that was very much the impression I got from Robie hanging out with him. Then I got to be a fly on the wall with the Ubuntu Developer Membership Board meeting. And this was a story in and of itself. So this process by which you heard people can become contributors to be able to submit code, they wanted to do this meeting. It's typically conducted over IRC. But because there was a quorum of Ubuntu board members present at the conference, they said, hey, maybe we can just do it in person. The applicant is here. The board members are here. Let's just do it in person. So first, the struggle was to find a room. That was easy enough. So we talked to the Ubuntu logistics team and they went, yep, here's a room you can use. Okay, great. We got that problem solved. Then they come to me and they're like, hey, we need broadcast equipment. The meeting has to be public record, so we need a way to record it. We need a way to get audio. We need a way to get video. We need a way to stream it. I'm like, when is this? They go, well, it'll be, it was an hour. Now we're down to about 40 minutes. Like, okay, let's go. So I run back to, the funny thing was, before I even knew how we were going to pull it off, I wasn't worried about it, in part because I just kind of looked around. I'm like, well, there's enough nerds in this room that we're going to solve this. It's not going to be a problem. You can walk up and down where these booths are, and there's cameras, and there's laptops, and there's wires, and there's cables, and you name it, a nerd has it. And so I just look around and I go, hey, nerds, I need a mini USB cable. I need a long XLR cable. I need and just one after the other. Somebody's like, oh, I have that. I can loan you that. And I'll loan you that. And pretty soon, there we go. All the nerds came together and we had all the things that we needed. And so we get a room and we end up with, it wasn't an ideal stream. Were there problems? Yeah, there were some problems. Was it perfect audio all the way through? No, it wasn't perfect audio all the way through. But did we get the job done? Yes, we got the job done. And I got to be kind of a fly on the wall and kind of watch this process unfold. And so if you're interested in watching the entire Ubuntu Developer Membership Board meeting, we will link it in the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. You can check it out there. I would tell you that unless you're considering becoming an Ubuntu developer, that isn't really the juice of the story. The juice of the story, or really what to take away from it, is that anybody can do these things. Anybody can become a contributor. And you say to yourself, but Noah, I can't become a contributor because I don't know how to write code. That's fine. They have documentation, they have quality assurance, and they have testing. And so you can go try the software and just document your experience and help issue bug reports. You can do like Simon Quigley did and start with, here are some existing bug reports. Let me just see if I can fix some of these things. And then, you can start participating in actually writing the code and fixing the problems and working under somebody, and they will guide you and they will mentor you and they will teach you how to fix things. And once you get to where you got your sea legs, so to speak, and you're able to do it on your own, then you can apply as an Ubuntu developer to the membership board and say, hey, I want to do what this applicant went through. I want you to ask me questions. I want you to allow me to prove my technical proficiency. And then I want to be able to have the privilege to submit code to Ubuntu myself. And so the conference is an absolutely fantastic one. I hope over time it grows. I would tell you that if my takeaway from the summit, the conference itself, is there's nothing for sale there. I mean, certainly there are products and certainly there are people making money, but the focus was 100% on communities and the projects and how they interacted with each other. And it was deeply meaningful to me to see people from the Framework Laptop Company interacting with Carl Rochelle from System 76 as he was talking about their work on Pop! OS, and everybody in the same room acknowledging that when the tide go up, all the ships rise if we're all working together and collaboratively and openly, whether or not we have competing interests, whether or not we are offering similar products, we're all kind of in it together. And so Canonical invites people like Carl to come out and speak because they would like to see Pop! OS succeed right alongside Ubuntu proper. System 76 and Framework want to see each other succeed. And so watching an entire community of people that want to work together towards the larger goal of building things with open source, being able to subjugate themselves to say, I'm not the most important thing or the most important person in the room. It's about the larger goal of building something and letting me be less so that this thing can be more. That was a deeply humbling experience, and I was proud to be a part of it, and it was a ton of fun. So next year, as the Ubuntu Summit comes up again, that's something you think you would be interested. They're looking to get more people involved. So if you have a project with Ubuntu, particularly if you're a project maintainer or you work inside of the Ubuntu community, if you're contributing code, they would love you to make the effort to come out and see them in person. It was fun to watch people come in off the street, people that lived in the local area that didn't know much about Canonical and didn't know much about Ubuntu and walked in and what is this and then they went, well, here's how to get registered. And then they got to come in, they got to participate in the conference, and they got to see what open source is all about. They were able to do that largely because of the resources that Canonical puts behind doing that conference. So I would implore you to consider it next year if it's something that you work or you're doing a project, and it doesn't have to be Ubuntu specific. One of the reasons that they went away from the Ubuntu Developer Summit and they're just calling it Ubuntu Summit is because they want to have people from all walks of open source life come and participate in the discussion. From fedoramagazine.org, I'm happy to once again announce the early release of Fedora Linux 41. Each cycle, the quality team carefully validates the candidate builds against our release criteria, and this time around we felt confident that we were ready at our earliest target date. Thank you and congratulations to everybody in Fedora who worked so hard to make this possible and to all our upstream projects. and to everyone who helps build a better world by engaging with the community built with free and open source software. Fedora Linux 41 defaults to a new major release of the command line package management tool DNF. This version is much faster and smaller, requiring few supporting packages. It eliminates the need for micro-DNF and containers and memory-constrained systems, and now the same DNF can be used across containers, servers, desktops, and devices. Fedora Workstation 41 is now based on GNOME 47. You can read more about what Fedora Workstation 41 is. You can do that in the blog post, which we'll have linked to you at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Finally, they're shipping an image-based Fedora variants for Atomic Desktop's CoreOS and Fedora IoT with a new tool called BootC. This is the successor to RPM OS tree, and building on those ideas in a more flexible way. It lets you use container patterns to define your personal flavor of Fedora. One of the really exciting things is there's a new spin dedicated to Plasma Mobile. And so I'll have this link for you in the show notes too at fedoraproject.org/spin/KDE-mobile. But the thing that excites me about KDE Mobile is this is what I've been using on my Pine Tab 2, and I really like it. In fact, I think it's so good, usability-wise, I think it's on par with Android. Now, where it maybe has some room to be for opportunity for growth is in their app ecosystem, obviously, because you're not getting access to the Android apps or the iOS apps. But I think the longer that these distros and these mobile-focused distros go on, the better things are going to be for us in that world, and the more applications and the more access we're going to have. The other thing that I was kind of excited to learn about, Fedora is beginning to target x86 and x86 on tablets. Now, at first that was a bit confusing to me because I said to myself, who has an x86 tablet? The vast majority of tablets out there are ARM-based devices, and certainly the vast majority of mobile devices, that is to say phones, are ARM-based. So why are we focusing so heavily on x86? Well, the reason is because they want to target every device that can be used in a tablet fashion. We're not talking just about tablets, but we're talking about all-in-ones. We're talking about laptops that have a foldable screen that can fold all the way over and disattach itself from the laptop portion and run just as a laptop, or just as a tablet. Then you've got the devices like the X1 Carbon tablet, which is a tablet that has an attachable keyboard. One of the devices I was able to get my hands on when I was at Ubuntu Summit was a device called a Minisform. And the Minisform V3 specifically, a gentleman had it, and I walked up and I said, "Man, that is a sharp looking tablet. Can you tell me about it?" And he said, "I really like it. It's an x86 AMD based tablet. It sells for $889 and has a 14-inch display, a 2K resolution, an AMD Radeon 780M, and it's available with runs Linux flawlessly." And so it's the device is the Minisform, MINISFORUM. We'll have a link in the show notes at podcast.asknoahshow.com. Again, at $900, I was thinking to myself, that's a pretty expensive tablet, but I was told by the gentleman that has it, he actually took it to a gaming LAN party and was able to use it as his gaming workstation. So if you're able to game on a tablet plus take on some pretty serious tasks, that starts to up the value for me, and I start to see it that being kind of cool. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm not personally a person that likes to work off of tablets. I'm very much a desktop user and or a laptop with Thunderbolt kind of guy. So I struggle to say this is right for me, but I like the fact that there are more and more x86-based tablets out there, and I like the fact that there are more and more distros that are going to work with x86 tablets. Now, Steve, I know you are using Fedora and have it installed on your laptop. Are you excited to make the upgrade?
I usually let it bake for a little bit, to be honest with you. I do, however, plan on checking out Fedora 41. So I ordered my sister-in-law a new laptop. So I've kind of been new to us. Mm-hmm. It's one of those, it's an HP ProBook. So our friend, Mr. DeLuca, he gave me one of these as a retirement from the place where he works. Mm-hmm. And my wife really liked that. The one he gave me is a Gen 2, and I went on and got a Gen 8, which is still used. Mm-hmm. But I have concerns because the Gen 2 had zero issues. It is currently running Fedora, runs flawlessly, didn't have to do anything to it, and she loves it. But in 6 generations, who knows what has happened with the hardware. So my sister-in-law, I normally put her on endless.
Okay.
And that works really well because, if she pulls it being immutable, if she pulls the power, whatever, there's nothing that is going to break this operating system like a normal a normal operating system might. However, I have concerns that, either the screen isn't going to rotate properly or whatever. So for people that don't know, the ProBook is a line that's very similar to the Yoga, which means that it has a touchscreen. You can fold it back. You can tent it. You can turn it in all these different directions. So it's got an accelerometer to figure out which orientation it's in. And so that wasn't the reason we got it, but I want to make sure that it works. So it'll be showing up on Thursday. So by the time I check in with you next week, I will let you know which way we went with that.
Yeah, please do. I'll be excited to hear that. I think that's really cool. And by the way, rock on for being an awesome brother-in-law and hey, you are under my technical stewardship. You are part of the flock here. Let me load you up with an operating system and get you situated on a different piece of hardware.
You know what? My wife's family does a lot for their entire family. They're very practical and hands-on, which means there isn't a lot for me to give back. But what I can do is I manage the technical stuff for them because that's just not something they're super in tune to. So, things like controlling the tablet that they get and putting new pipe on it or all of these types of things that they're not necessarily aware of. They know that this thing or that thing's annoying, but they don't know how to solve that problem. I'm happy to do that for them.
Rock on, brother. The more you talk, the more my respect grows for you. Recently, the Linux kernel community was shocked when Greg KH, a senior Linux kernel leader, announced in a patch that several Russian Linux maintainers had been removed from their roles because of various compliance requirements, end quote. He added that they can come back in the future if sufficient documentation is provided. These people are apparently all Russian citizens, and they weren't nobodies. They were maintainers of some important hardware Linux drivers, including devices from Acer and Cirrus Logic. Russia has now called the recent delisting of these kernel maintainers an act of discrimination and pledged to establish an independent development community for the open source operating system. Quote, "We will strengthen cooperation and establish a dialogue with those countries that are ready to work with us," Russian digital ministry said in a comment to local media, adding that they plan to build their own alternative structure. Russia's response came after the Linux community was blocked 11 Russians from maintaining the Linux kernel, the operating system's core code, citing these compliance issues. So here's the part that really, really disappoints me and surprises me is I thought that open source was about letting you do whatever you want to do without a value judgment on the code. And we focused on the meritocracy of the tech and we left all the rest of it to other people and other circles. And it seems to me like we're punishing the developers for maybe decisions or realities that are outside of their control. Am I misguided, Steve? Am I missing something?
It's a really tricky situation, as most things are, right? The Linux kernel has a lot of contributions from around the world, including governments that might be opposed to Russia in one way or the other and have security concerns around what sort of backdoors or things might be introduced into the code due to people who have a nationality that they don't that they have a political disagreement for. Whether or not these people are actually likely to commit a problem, unfortunately, the way that our society is in order for us to handle all of the various attributes of people and things that we manage, we also make generalizations based on you came from here, and so because of that, I'm going to make some snap judgment, and that's just the way it is. So I imagine the Linux Foundation is balancing all of the pressure that they have from governments that are concerned about the code coming in and the individual liberties of the contributors.
Sad day for open source. I'm glad I'm not the one that has to make those decisions. Music and Ears means we're out of time. I appreciate you joining this. This show is recorded every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com.